And good morning, everyone. Thanks for jumping on with us today for another ATS University, one of our many webinars that we've done this year in the last few years on various products and applications that are available through the ATS spec product selection system. One of our partners, Zoeller, recently had a major redesign on the panels that align with their pumps. And we're going to walk through the Pivot Panel Pro and Plus series, I think, today. And all the different options and configurations and nitty gritty details of why they're awesome. But before we dive in, just a couple little bits of housekeeping. First and foremost, an introduction. If this is your first time on an ATS University call, thanks for joining us. My name is Zach Allison. I'm our market development manager across Canada and the US. I manage our team, and our team is there to help you out with getting started on the ATS spec tool. We can help your firm get loaded in, get your masters organized, help you out with individual projects, and of course, lunch and learns similar to the webinars that we're doing today, specific for your firm. So if you need any help with that, please feel free to reach out. I can either take care of yourself or get one of my team to lend a hand in getting you started out on the ATS spec tool. We also have done a significant number of these ATS webinars and started recording them and hosting them on our ATS webinar section of the spec tool. So if you want to review any of the previously recorded sessions, I'll show you how you can access that later on. But that is a reminder that this session is being recorded and we do have everyone muted upon entry. Although I'll be keeping an eye on the Q&A and chat fields along the way. So if you have any questions for Jeff, as we dive into the details of the presentation, please feel free to reach out and I'll bring them up at an appropriate point in time. As with all of our sessions, we will be sending out a certificate of attendance. This typically gets sent out on Friday by our MD team, and this is going to be available for you to self-report for any hours that you may need for your professional development. I guess without any further ado, let me introduce Jeff Sloss, who's going to be going over the pivot panel today, all the great details that make it fantastic. And for me, nice and easy to pair with the various pumps and much easier than the previous iteration to make sure we're getting the right pump with the right panel. So I'll pass it over to you, Jeff. Thanks for joining us today.
All right, thanks, Zach. Yeah, hi everybody. My name is Jeff Sloss. I'm from Chicago, but I do live in Louisville. I've been with Zoeller for 12 years. The reason I moved to Louisville was to join Zoeller. I've been in the pump and controls field really my whole life. And back in Chicago, I owned a company where we did pump and sales service and discovered and lived through a lot of the hassles of pumps and controls. I did that for about 18 years. Ended up developing some products because they didn't exist, and Zoeller liked what they saw, and that's how we kind of got to talking, and I ended up joining forces with them. So anyway, here we are 12 years later, and we now have obviously the Pivot and Pivot Pro line of control panels. And, you might be just thinking at this point that, okay, they put their own brand on a control panel, big deal. We did a lot more than that. We took a lot of those frustrations in the field, from speccing a panel to, gosh, I need a different panel every time I want a different feature, to the frustrations that the guys have actually using the panels. And I'll cover some of that. But we took all that and we decided, you know what, let's make a microprocessor controlled panel and solve all these problems. And at the same time, we reduced the number of panels that it takes to cover our pumps was about 3,600 different panels. Now it's about 108. So it's a huge difference. And I'm probably jumping ahead a little bit here, but so let me just go ahead and get started on the first slide. I'm assuming you can see it. Somebody holler if you can't. I guess that would be Zach.
Looking good. And I will say I was very happy with the pivot change, because I remember going through that document that must have been 20 pages long of the matrix matching each panel to each different pump iteration. So
exactly.
At ATS on our spec side, we were very thankful for the change.
And just so you know, that's not just the Zoeller thing. That's just how the whole industry is. And the pivot panels are the first departure from that way of thinking. That's why we say pivot your thinking. It's a very different way to think about panels. So we'll look at the Pivot Pro, and we'll kind of compare that to traditional panels. Some of the functionality and important features of the Pivot. There's a couple features that the Pivot just includes by default that just make it worth, even if you had a choice of panels, it makes it kind of a no-brainer to pick the Pivot, because there's protections built in that the Pivot provides the customer and the contractor that no other panel gives. We'll look at some sales literature and other kind of other assets related to Pivot, and I believe we build in some Q&A time, so maybe Zach will do that verbally with chat questions. So feel free to ask away. Oh, and I don't want to forget to mention, over the past year or so, we've recorded and posted at least 6, maybe even up to a dozen videos about Pivot on the Zoeller YouTube site. So don't think this is your only, way of getting any sort of information about Pivot. Most of them, unfortunately, feature my voice or face, but if you can put up with that, they're there for you, and there's some good, I guess there's a good array of videos, is I guess the word I was looking for. So this is a picture of a couple of real simple traditional mechanical panels, right? So you've got your duplex on the left and your simplex on the right. These are both single phase, simple panels. You've got contactors in there, circuit breakers, and then you've got a circuit board. Now, keep in mind, a circuit board like this doesn't mean it has a processor or any sort of smarts to it. It does not. Circuit boards without a processor are really just a kind of a way to collect parts together and make it simpler to produce. There's nothing past relay logic on these boards, and that's the case with most panels in our business even today. There's a couple of companies. You can see SJE Rhombus is the manufacturer of this panel, and these are the panels that we've sold for years. But Rhombus even might have a panel that's smarter now, so to speak. But I just wanted to show you, those of you that have seen panels or had your hands on them or respect them, this may look familiar to you. It's got an HOA or handoff auto. It has inputs for float switches and power, outputs for pumps. There's a dry contact pretty much on any panel made. So this is a typical panel. Now, if single phase duplex, no features is what you want, then that one on the left there, that was our old part number, then that's going to be sufficient. But if you want to add anything to that panel, even the most basic features like a cycle counter or something, then you're going to have to fill out a form like this. It's going to have, which features, how you want it built. That part number is going to change, that price is going to change, and then the panel's got to be built and shipped to you. The way we do Pivot is a lot different. As I mentioned before, we're using a microprocessor. Now, when you use a microprocessor, you can do a lot of things electronically that you couldn't do before. You had to do it before mechanically. So the example of a cycle counter, for example, in that old panel, that would have been a mechanical device that is mounted on a DIN rail, most likely wired in to something to increment every time the contactor was triggered. Well, we don't have to do that anymore. We can count cycles electronically with the microprocessor. We can do a ton of things electronically with the microprocessor. And what does that mean? That means you're not adding anything to the panel. As long as your firmware allows for it, it's basically a freebie. So we're able to add all these freebies to the panel that are nice features, etc., but they're also going to be things that save the day and frankly save the little CYA for the guy putting it in too sometimes. So and we'll look at a little bit of that. But Also, by doing this, you're reducing the item numbers. I mentioned before, we went from 3,600 panels to cover our pumps down to about 108. By the time we're all fully developed in the Pivot Pro line, we're going to be probably around 160 or so panels. That makes it really easy. You know, in my old days as a contractor back in Chicago, I didn't stock any panels, not one. If Pivot had been available back then, there's probably, you know, let's say 6 or 8 different Zoeller pumps that I use, and to cover those those pumps in their various configurations, I might need a dozen different panels. I can put a dozen panels on my shelf, but I'm not going to put an unknown number of panels on my shelf because I never know what I'm going to need. So it makes it it puts you in the position as a contractor or as a wholesaler where you can stock things. You can stock panels. Or as somebody speccing a job, you know, you hear back, or you get a spec one day and you spec the panel out, and then the next day it's kind of the same thing, but there's a couple of additional features. It's probably going to be the same panel as long as it's a similar pump amp range and all that. So it just simplifies the whole process.
Well, and on that front, we don't often think about the stocking and how having that many SKUs can affect our project delivery timelines, but it also affects how long it takes the contractor to get that product to the site and installed. So that's one thing, where minimizing the number of SKUs, we don't think of that affecting us as the engineer side, but it certainly does when it comes down to our project delivery timelines.
Yeah, exactly. So you could have, a contractor that had a bad experience with some certain panel or manufacturer and not want to use it, and they're just not going to experience that, or very unlikely anyway to experience that with the Pivot, just because they're always in stock, or at least that's kind of that's the goal. Because of the microprocessor abilities, we're able to solve a bunch of problems. We'll look at those, and there's a lot more diagnostics that are built in, and condition monitoring that's built in. Now, this would have all been, fine and well, but kind of worthless if we had to triple the price on the panels to achieve all this. And that's where the beauty of all this comes into play, is the prices didn't really go up. We kept the prices of a basic pivot, or a Pivot panel compared to a basic traditional panel, is very similar. In most cases within 5%. There's a few outliers, but most of the time it's a very similar price to the old style panels, even though it's got a ton of extra features. Still have the compact size, just like the old panels. And then that last bullet there, prioritize running pumps. Now you might think, well, no kidding, it's a control panel. That's what it does. It's its only reason for existence. But we're going to come back to that. Prioritizing running pumps is a crucial thing, obviously, and something the traditional panels actually don't do. And a lot of people don't realize that. So on the left, you've got a Pivot, on the right, a Pivot Pro. I'll kind of focus on the Pivot Pro because that's where the differences are. On a Pivot Pro, you have single phase or 3-phase. You can order it either way. Pivot only is single phase. On the Pivot Pro, you can see that the interface there has a LCD screen with some buttons to navigate a menu. There's a couple extra features on Pivot Pro. So when you get into 3-phase panels and maybe even the bigger pumps in single phase, you end up with things like seal fail or moisture seals, moisture sensors inside the pump, and thermals built into the windings. When you have those kinds of features, it's pretty common, or it's more common in those bigger pumps or 3-phase pumps. So it's a standard feature on the Pivot Pro to have the seal fail and thermal landing spots. The Pivot Pro can connect to Z-Control, which is our cloud-based system. So all of the features that are within Pivot that the customer uses, whether that's setting up alerts or changing configuration or just monitoring, That's all available in the cloud, basically for free, because we don't charge for the service. We can circle back to that later and spend a little more time on it, but we don't charge for Z Control. And the only thing that the customer is buying at the very beginning is an inexpensive little gateway, we call it. And once you have the gateway, it connects to the cloud, and they're good to go. No more extra fees, no cellular if they're able to use Wi-Fi. So anyway, and then to change settings within a Pivot Pro, it's real easy to do. You can just do it right there on the menu. You can also do it online with Z Control, or you can do it with a USB, like a thumb drive, and you put that in the USB slot. Going back over to the Pivot on the left there, the only way to change settings is with that thumb drive, sticking it into the USB. So you can still change all the settings. It's just a little bit more cumbersome. This is not super important. Well, it's important because it's our part numbers. You don't have to memorize this or anything. But I just want to point out, up in the upper right corner, you'll see FM 3297. If you want to know how we name panels, how we number the panels, this is it. So you can see that in the first column there, Pivot Pro is 1. So you're going to have 5 digits, then a dash, then 4 digits. And those first 5 digits are going to tell you the basic information about that panel. That's proved very helpful in some situations to kind of do a sanity check that you have the right panel for the lift station or whatever it is you're speccing out, because the numbers are going to tell you whether it's the Pivot or Pivot Pro, a simplex or duplex, the power, the amp range, etc. Inside the door on the panel, you have all the regular stuff. You've got your manufacturing sticker. On a Pivot Pro, you've got a device ID, which is what the cloud uses to identify it. You got your agency markings, your FCC statement, and you have a schematic there in that envelope. And there's another schematic that we include in the box in the carton. But we do put a QR code in all the panels now, and that QR code is really meant to be a help for the guys in the field that come up on a panel that might be an alarm or something, and they've never seen this panel. Gives them a quick way to get right to our website and the information specific to Pivot, instead of fumbling around trying to figure out where to go and how to figure things out. Not important, but this is a schematic. There's a couple dozen different schematics for the various panels. It's a real helpful way. People kind of use these as wiring guides, wiring diagrams for in the field. This is what the interface looks like on the Pivot Pro. It's kind of a closer up picture of it. You'll notice that in addition to the LCD screen and the buttons to navigate the menu, if you go down to the bottom, starting from the bottom, you've got a couple fuses there on the left. There's a control fuse and an alarm fuse. We separate those because some jurisdictions require separate incoming power sources for each of those circuits, the control circuit and alarm circuit. So if you've got that, the panel's built to accommodate. And then you've got basically what replaced the HOAs. So these are what we would call smart HOAs. The pump 2 is on the bottom, pump 1 is on the top in the white boxes there. And you'll notice they have a pump run LED and they've got handoff auto. And that, for those of you that might not know, HOA means handoff auto. Hand just means on. So if you put it to hand, the pump runs. Off is obviously off, and auto is the setting you typically would leave it in, because you're saying let the float switches tell the panel when to turn the pumps on. And then you've got some other LEDs there for stop, lead, lag, and up above high water. Those are the 3 or 4 float positions, and the LEDs come on and tell you various things about the floats, if not only if they come up, but if they're found to be faulted. And then there's a system ready LED that for the most part should be on all the time unless there's some sort of an alarm. The USB slot there, again, that's to not only to update settings, maybe there's a configuration setting that is wanting to be changed. I kind of say that real quickly and breeze right over it, gloss right over it, but you can't change configuration settings for the most part with traditional panels. That's kind of something new. We can change whether it's a 3 or 4 float, whether the float order is um, stop lead lag high or stop lead high lag, or whether the panel is a duplex or alternating, or or you want to make it into a simplex temporarily because of a pump being out. These are all things that can just be done very simply. That USB is also used to update. Maybe there's a whole neighborhood, let's say 100 panels that are going in, and you want them all to be the same. Well, you can make that thumb drive in your hand be the default settings, and as each one is powered up, you change the settings with that. Now you know they're all the same instead of relying on people inputting it on the menu. And then if we ever pushed out a firmware update that was crucial to do, then you would be able to get that off our website, put it on the thumb drive, and stick it into the panel and update the firmware. We haven't had to do that, thankfully. Sometimes there's a firmware change that we provide people because something needs to work a little differently in an application. So we've been able to accommodate that once in a while as well. So there's 4 main, I guess, categories that we'll review here of why Pivot Pro is different. It's recording data. It is able to provide diagnostics and alarms for things that you would be surprised we're able to diagnose and provide an alarm on. The configurability, kind of just mentioned that before, the configurability of the panel itself, and then just solving a bunch of the problems that were out there forever in the control panel world. So first of all, data recording, that's probably the easiest to understand. I mean, yeah, we can record those cycles. We can record elapsed time. We can display a pretty good list of information about the panel. Now, if it's a Pivot Pro, a lot of that can be displayed as you toggle through the menu. If it's a Pivot, you're going to have to pull that data off with a thumb drive. Now, if it's a Pivot Pro and it's connected to the cloud, all that data is online. So in addition to counts being online, you're also going to have a full alert history. There's no other way to have an alert history unless it's online. You can also do some of the configuration changes remotely from the cloud. So in the real world, what does that look like? That means a guy, that just installed a panel, got home, customer calls, there's a setting that he didn't tweak right, and he's able to do it from his phone without having to run back out there. That's a real world example and has happened several times. It saves headaches and makes guys pretty happy, actually, most of the time. And then
that's a pretty wild example. I would say, one thing I've found has been a change in the industry over the last decade or so is getting this data and tying it directly into BAS. That's almost become the expectation and the norm now, which is why I think this is just included in all the Pivot Pros, right?
Right. It sure is. A lot of the logic and some of the diagnostics that I'm going to show you, it is the same on Pivot versus Pivot Pro versus Pivot Pro Plus. The difference is only that you can't visually see it and access it as simply on Pivot. That's really what it comes down to. Remotely silencing and resetting a panel, you're also able to do that remotely. And we're constantly adding things. We're always updating what people can do remotely. We've chosen to do that slowly. We're able to roll out a new feature, say every quarter or whatever. We also have a in 2024, we'll have a premium tier of Z Control. The way Z Control exists now and has existed since 2016 will always be free, but we're going to have a premium tier that's going to give you other things, like trending analysis is listed there, but there's heat maps and kind of more of a grid interface for guys that are power users with Z Control. They may have hundreds of customers and locations on their account, and it just becomes a better way to manage it. So when we talk about diagnostics and alarms, most people think about a control panel when that globe on the top starts, either comes on red or the horn goes off. People always think, and they always kind of nickname it, it's a high water alarm. That's all they ever think of. Oh, that's a high water alarm. Well, we're utilizing that globe and the horn for a lot of other things besides a high water alarm. So we'll go, a few examples here. If somebody goes out to a site and they turn the pumps to off, using that HOA, you push that button that I showed you on the interface. In fact, here, I'll go back to that. You push that green button that has the 1 and the green button that has the 2. When you push that, it toggles through auto, off, and hand. So let's say you go out to a site, you turn the pumps off because the contractor is out there and he's trying to figure out what's going on. He figures out what's going on. He fixes the part and he goes home for the day. And the next phone call he gets is a high water alarm because he forgot to put him back to auto. That happens quite a bit. I shouldn't say quite a bit, but it happens often enough for it to matter. And what'll happen with a pivot is by default, after 4 hours, the panel's it's gonna go into alarm. And it's really just going into alarm. It's not going back we can't safely go back to auto. That would be a liability thing. But we can give an alarm and say, hey, I'm off. Am I supposed to be off? Because I'm not going to turn any pumps on if the water comes up. If somebody leaves it off, they're out of luck. So if they accidentally left it off, they're going to get a phone call, but it's going to be a happier phone call from somebody that says, hey, this is an alarm. And that guy's going to go, oh, yikes, I forgot to put it in auto. Here's what you do, or he runs back out or whatever. We don't have a flood situation. So that's one thing. And for those of you that are thinking, oh, every time he leaves it off, he's going to get, the customer's going to get hassled with an alarm 4 hours later. That is it. He's able to just hold the button for 6 seconds. And when he does that, it gives an indicator that yes, it's off, but there will be no alarm. So if he's doing that very intentionally and he doesn't want an alarm in 4 hours or whatever he changes that default setting of 4 hours to, he can do that. Continuous run. So there's a 20-minute default setting, and any of these defaults can be changed to whatever is appropriate, but just by default, 20 minutes, a pump runs nonstop for 20 minutes, there's going to be an alarm. They can turn that off. They can make it up to 99 minutes. They can turn it down to 1 minute, whatever's appropriate for the site. But that's basically an alarm saying either a float got stuck up or maybe an impeller is jammed or a discharge pipe is clogged, all those different things. You're going to get a continuous run alarm eventually. We're also able to monitor the overloads, the contactors. We're looking at the seal fails, the thermals. All those kinds of things are always being monitored and will be reported in a split second if anything's wrong. And some of these things actually, when somebody sets up a panel and the floats and the pumps and they do it, I'll just say, using air quotes, incorrectly, that doesn't show itself on traditional panels necessarily right away. And the first time that does show itself, it shows itself in a high water alarm that's potentially caused property damage. In the pivot, everything is smart enough to report, pretty quickly that there's something wrong. Now the last bullet point here, float switch errors. This circles back to that prioritize running pumps bullet point from a few slides back that I mentioned is really the most important thing. The pivot is microprocessor controlled. It sees switch inputs as an on and an off, and it's not a direct wired, let's say, signal to a relay, to like a traditional mechanical relay. What it is, it's an input into a microprocessor, into basically the logic that runs the firmware logic. So that being said, it's a lot different because if you let's say you don't get a stop float signal on a traditional panel, if a stop float doesn't come up, and this is where a lot of people don't realize this, and this is true of our own traditional panels that we used to sell. When that stop float doesn't come up, and the next float, which would be your lead float in a duplex, when that comes up, guess what happens? The answer is nothing. No pump runs. What's going to end up happening is that water is going to continue to rise. It's going to trigger the high water float. There's going to be an alarm. Hopefully no property damage, but there could be. But that's the first time that somebody knows that there's a stop float issue. With pivot, that stop float doesn't come up, but then the lead float comes up. Guess what happens? The pump runs. We know that that pump should be running because a water level has lifted the float, obviously. So we need to turn a pump on. So we turn the pump on. Well, how do we turn that pump off? We don't have a stop float. We're disregarding the stop float now because it's in fault. Well, what we're doing is we're going to use the lead float as our on and off, but we're going to add 10 seconds to each cycle every time so we don't short cycle the pump. And we're going to use similar logic on the other floats as well. Half of the firmware for the pivot line of panels, half of the firmware that was written is float switch or float fault logic. It's very large is the point I'm making. There's a lot to it. You know, all the different combinations of floats that could be up or down or in fault. You combine that with whether or not a contactor, there's voltage across a contactor and things are doing what they're supposed to be inside the panel. All those things are taken into account for the pivot to be able to make decisions on what it should do. Now we're always going to default to turn the pumps on, right? If there's a float that comes up, there's going to be a pump that turns on. But I'm just, I'll repeat, on a traditional panel that we've all sold for many, many years, if that $30 or whatever a float costs, if the stop float gets stuck, the entire station will not run a pump. So it's just kind of an unfortunate but very real situation.
Yeah, it's a pretty wild. It's almost like a change of perspective. You know, the priority of running the pump. Like, it makes a lot of sense. You know, you're a lot better off running the pump and getting the water out and using, like you said, the lead pump plus a buffer time to ensure that you're not short cycling. But is it a change of perspective, or is it just the technology is allowing this frame of reference?
Well, it's interesting. I've seen other companies come out with microprocessors in their panels now, and they're not doing any of this float logic. It's very tricky to figure it all out. And they just, I don't know if they just didn't think of it. And of course, they're probably seeing ours now, and I'm sure they're going to make changes to their products. But as far as I'm aware, Pivot is the only line of panels in existence that does this kind of belt and suspenders and letting other things run the pumps if needed. But this whole idea of being wholly dependent on the the stop float working properly, that whole idea is, to me, that's old school. I would never have a panel in my backyard that operated that way. It just, to me, it almost seems ridiculous now.
Yeah, not to mention, in your data center, in your hospital, in your critical care area, to
Right.
be that reliant upon a single float. It's
Exactly.
wild that yeah, when you say it like that, it's almost like slaps you in the face with how obvious it is.
How obvious it is, and how really just until, we've been selling Pivot for 2 years. So until 2 years ago, like that advantage didn't exist. So So the third category here is configurability, and a lot of people kind of gloss over this, but this is huge. This just makes it so flexible, and I don't want to use the word universal, but let's say more universal, more applicable to more stations. So let's assume we've got a duplex panel here, and we look at the pump modes. Well, I've got a bunch of different settings when I look at pump modes. I've got lead, simplex, duplex, alternating. Well, simplex, that's simple. I could put it into simplex just because I have a pump down, let's say. So actually that you would do a different way. You'd do it right from the HOA. You'd put that into permanent off, whichever pump is being worked on. And then that tells the panel to just operate as a simplex. So a duplex can operate as a simplex without creating alarms. For those of you that have never been in the field, a duplex panel, when you want it to operate as a simplex, which isn't uncommon, that's a real thing that happens often because you're having a pump down for service. You have to rewire the float switches. Most guys don't know that don't work in the field, and it's a hassle. And it always seemed kind of ridiculous to me that we couldn't figure out a way to, have these panels be smart enough to recognize that they're in a simplex mode now, but that in fact is not the case. Even our panels, you're going from duplex to simplex. You got to rewire the float switches so that the panel doesn't go into alarm every time it tries to run that down pump. Duplex and alternating, they're both alternating. What duplex will do is allow both pumps to run simultaneously if there's a lag float that comes up. In alternating mode, even if a lag float comes up, it will only ever run one pump at a time. They're probably rare, but there are applications where either where you're pumping it can't take that much flow, or hopefully this isn't the case, but sometimes I know people have used it because they haven't gotten enough power to the panel. It's only enough power to run one pump at a time. So you don't want both pumps turning on. So there's some real uses for that. And then the last mode, which is the first one listed there, lead. What's that? Well, on old panels, when you wanted what's called a lead lag operation, that meant you wanted one pump to always be kind of the lead pump, and the lag pump, the second pump, would never turn on unless the lag float came up. Now that's fine. And sometimes people would use a smaller pump for the lead pump because it was a dewatering situation, and the 100-year rain pump is the bigger pump and it's in lag and you don't want to run that one. But the inherent problem with a lead lag selector switch, as the option used to be called, is that the lag pump never runs. It sits there dormant unless somebody's getting in there to purposely turn it on. So what we decided to fix that problem. And what lead does is, if you've got a lead lag scenario, then you can pretty much every alternating panel or duplex panel, everybody assumes a 1-to-1 pumping ratio, right? And those of us that have been in the industry a long time have heard the phrase, you want even wear on your pumps. So I own a house, like most of us do, and if I've got a duplex station in my backyard, which means 2 pumps in the pit, I do not want even wear on my pumps. I want uneven wear on my pumps, which goes against what the conventional wisdom has been for the longest time. I want one pump to wear out well in advance of the other one wearing out, because it may take me a week or 2 to get a pump changed or something, and the worst thing is having no pumps. So I want uneven wear. So what the lead mode allows you to do is to just select that 1-to-1 ratio to be whatever you want it to be. You can have it be 3-to-1, 10-to-1, 99-to-1. You can have it be 73-to-27. Whatever the ratio is you want. There's 2 digits on each side of the colon. So, and what that does is it allows you to put most of the wear on one pump, or almost all of the wear on one pump, and maybe just have an exercise cycle for that second pump. So hopefully that wasn't too confusing. the next bullet there for switch operation, 3 or 4 floats. The duplex panels come with a jumper pre-installed, and that's to jumper so that you can just use a 3 float setup, a stop, lead, and then a lag high. It's already jumpered, so you don't have to install a jumper. If you want to use a 4 float setup, you just pull that jumper out, which separates those 2 inputs inside the panel. You can change the float order. You can do stop, lead, lag, high, or stop, lead, high, lag. You can, we have a couple future improvements coming. You'll be able to use a pressure transducer. Sorry, couldn't come up with the word. Pressure transducer. Those are analog inputs. Our circuit boards have a spot for an analog input, but it's not, let's say, activated yet. So, but that's coming. And there won't be any extra charge for it. Well, there'll be you'll buy your pressure transducer kit, which is just the transducer and the little thing that plugs into our board.
Wanted to
Indicators,
bring up a
you can latch. Oh, sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, sorry. Just wanted to bring up a question around here in the kind of mode and switches discussion on floats. We had a comment coming in about the variety of floats and number of floats that may be included in storm or retention and detention tanks, where maybe they can only put out a certain amount of water into the grid, or they have to keep a minimum level inside the tank. Could you talk about how maybe this ties into that?
Well, I'm not sure I fully understand the question, but like if you were trying to use a minimal number of floats, even on a duplex, you can go down to 2 floats. You just jumper the stop and lead, and then you can operate. If you'd want a wider swing, a bigger tether length on your float switch, but you can operate the pumps with a single switch if you had to, just by jumpering the 2 inputs. And then your second float would be your lag and your high jumpered together. I'm not sure if that's exactly what you were asking. If somebody's asking about, they aren't set up necessarily for pump down. Was the question related to pump down, or what was the other?
It's more on, so you're using a stormwater retention tank, and you're only, either you're only allowed to send a certain amount of water to the city, GPM or gallon per hour, or maybe you need to maintain, if you're using it for rainwater harvesting, you may want to keep a certain amount of water inside the tank. And that would just be where your extra float is for a stop, probably.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, you would just, if you wanted a certain amount of water in the tank, you just wouldn't have your pump turn on until something above that, and you'd have your stop float turn off to retain that amount of water in the tank. So you're just pumping off the excess, I suppose. But yeah, there's no reason you couldn't set it up that way. Now there's a whole different category of pumps called time dosing, which I'm sure you guys are aware of, that these are not set up with timer dials yet to be time dosing panels. So we have a different line of panels to be time dosing panels. We cover the gamut on that, but for now, that is not pivot, just so you know. Maybe that was more what the question had to do with. I'm not sure. Should I keep going? Does that answer that, do you think?
Yeah, I think we're good.
Okay. One of the on the top, you've got a globe and you've got a horn on the side. You can choose, there's different things you can choose for configurability. You can choose whether or not that horn latches or goes away when the condition goes away. And then the globe, this is a nice feature. The old panels had a solid, when there was some sort of an alarm, it went on solid. And then you paid extra to have a blinker or a flasher. So what we did is we give you either of those choices if that's what you want, but by default, it's called what we call alarm based. So there's different blink sequences or patterns that globe on the top will do based on what the alarm condition is. So that makes it real nice. the homeowner can be at the kitchen sink and see the panel is in alarm, and on the phone describe the blink sequence to the contractor. And the contractor can, look that up on his cheat sheet and see that that's a bad contactor or whatever it is, and know what he's getting into, and maybe even make a recommendation to the homeowner over the phone. Who knows? So that has already proven itself pretty handy, even for a panel that's not connected to the cloud. And there's many others. As you go through the menu, you'll see probably about 16 different configuration settings that could be changed. Now, I say that at the risk of thinking this is very complicated. It is not complicated. We've picked very reasonable default settings for everything. So most of the time, if you just set the thing up the way it is, the way it came from the factory, it's probably going to be fine. And if it isn't, you're going to see, oh, you're going to discover that something's not quite right, and have the ability to tweak that setting to make it match your application. And then our last category here of problem solving. This first one was so ridiculous to me for the whole time I was in the field. You have a high water float that comes up and goes into an alarm, pumps, maybe runs a pump, whatever it does, and then that high water condition goes away. The alarm goes away. And our own panels did that until pivot. So the globe turns off and the horn stops its noise, and nobody, when somebody finally gets to the building, nobody has any idea that that alarm condition occurred. We didn't feel that was the right way to report an alarm condition. So our alarm conditions, for the most part, default to latching, which means somebody's got to go up to the panel and acknowledge it. Well, if it's remote connected, you can do that remotely, but otherwise you would walk up to the panel, you would push the toggle on the outside of the panel down for 1 second to silence, or you hold it down for 3 seconds to clear. Another problem we kind of touched on already, you need this duplex panel to be a simplex panel because there's a pump down. You can do that very quickly. The smart HOA, we covered the second bullet there. Don't forget it's off. But the first one, some guys, this may or may not have happened to anybody but they put it to hand, pump down, maybe float switches aren't working, so they put the panel in hand mode, which turns the pump on, starts pumping it down. Then they get distracted and go do something else. And by the time they come back, the pumps burn out. Well, what we do is we put a 5-minute default limit on hand. So after 5 minutes, hand goes back to auto. And if they want it to run again, they just put it back into hand again. They can change 5 minutes if they want to, but that's how that operates. The whole idea here, hey, we've got the smarts now built into the panel. Let's give the tech and the installer and the owner all the info we can. When they walk up to that panel, it's not just a globe, it's not just a horn. They're able to see on a Pivot Pro, they're able to see on a screen, and they're able to see corresponding LEDs that are doing blinking or different color or whatever. And that's all coordinated. That's all going to tell them most of the time exactly what they need to know. Now the Pivot doesn't have the screen, but it still has the LEDs and the behaviors, and is not as good as having a screen, but still gives them a really good indication of what's happening. I know we're short on time. I'm gonna scream through these last few slides here. The cloud, we do have a mobile app, so you're able to use a mobile app or a mobile friendly website, either way. Lots of literature out there. I assume you guys have access to all this, and if you don't, just let me know and I'll make sure you do. Sales sheets on Pivot on one side, Pivot Pro on the other side. Tech data sheets, as we call them. These are a little more technical in nature, more for the engineering crowd. Quick reference guides. So, maybe you don't want to read the 16-page installation instructions. This is the first product we've ever done a quick reference guide on. So it's kind of all the basics of what you need to know to set a panel up and get it running, and a little bit of troubleshooting on the backside. Probably not important for you guys. This is where you have cross references to our old panels. This is a chart. I know it's hard to read and I'm going through quick, but this is a chart of all the features that panels have and the different models. I'll say real quick, we didn't touch on what Pivot Pro Plus is. You may see that. That's when we have to put it in a bigger enclosure. That's the bottom line. It's in a bigger enclosure because of a future option or because it's either a start kit panel or a reversing panel. So if you are using our reversing pumps, that's going to require a reversing panel, and that reversing panel is going to be in a bigger enclosure, which makes it a Pivot Pro Plus. These are all the assets, spec sheets and instructions and all the different things that you have access to. They are all accessible through this QR code. If anybody wants to take a picture of that, you're welcome to. I'll leave it there for 3 more seconds. But that's where we can, that's where you can access very quickly all the assets for Pivot.
Just while you're on there, we'll give them a couple more seconds here. Couple of questions coming in. So one, we talked about the Z Control cloud system. If they wanted to just have the information tied into, say, their own BAS system, I saw that there's an auxiliary dry contact on each of the lines. Is that how they would do that?
Yeah, so built, it wouldn't be like a real integrated, here's specifically what the alarm is type of situation like it would be with our cloud. But what you can do, you wouldn't even need the gateway. All you would do is connect to our dry contacts. So on a duplex, there'll be 3 dry contacts, 1 for each pump. So you get your pump run dry contact, and then there's an alarm dry contact. So all of the alarms go to that single contact, and that contact changes position if there's an alarm condition of any sort, which probably has occurred to most guys hearing me that, oh, that means I don't know what exactly the alarm is, but I know there is an alarm.
Gotcha. And then
So,
another question coming in, could you just touch on, explain a little bit more detail, the duty standby mode?
I'm sorry, the duty standby mode?
Yeah, that's the question just says, can you explain in a little bit more detail duty standby mode?
I'm not sure what they're asking there. There's a duty cycle on that's only accessible via the cloud. I don't know if that's what they were talking about. And that's just showing you the length of cycles. Instead of just a cycle count, it's a cycle length. And we're going to use that to build out trending analysis.
My guess is that it's probably along the lines of like it sounds like they're asking about lead lag, where your first pump's coming on and then your second pump is in standby mode, and then if the leg float goes up, they would go on. So that might be what you're looking for. If you have any follow-up questions for whoever was asking that, please feel free to reach out to me directly, and we can have a deeper conversation on it. Just Zach@atspec.com.
Yeah, and to kind of touch on that, if your lead float comes up and whatever pump is in sequence turns on, pumps it out, your lead float goes down, your stop float goes down, then the stop float comes back up, lead float comes back up. The other pump now turns on if it's in a regular alternating mode. If the water continues to rise for whatever reason and lag comes on, now both pumps are running. So that would be a duplex mode. If you had chosen instead alternating mode, then only one pump would run, and it would actually turn that existing pump off, go back to the other pump, because maybe that pump is having a problem, and that's why the water rose. There's some other.
If they have any further questions, just reach out to me directly. I'll be able to have a conversation with you on that.
This really, I don't think is that important. The last bullet there, 2024, we've got some other options that are, sometime in 2024, we hope to have incorporated into Pivot. We have intrinsically safe panels now. We have time dose panels now, but they're not Pivot. So, and right this minute, if you needed a heater in Pivot, we'd have to turn that down because we don't have it drawn in. We're almost there. Adding a heater, adding a lightning arrestor, it's not a big deal, but it is something that we will offer soon.
And just as we're wrapping up here, I've launched the a quick little poll for people if you want to see how much you took in today. And if there's any questions, feel free to bring them up. I
Actually,
guess just as they're finishing off the poll here, Jeff, I'll ask you a question here. What do you think is like the biggest feature in your mind? Like when this came out and you've been working with it now for a couple of years, what do you think is the biggest feature that makes a difference in your day to day?
I'd have to say what I emphasized during the PowerPoint is that the float fault logic, that's a game changer. That's just saving property. That's property protection. If you're selling, if a contractor's selling a customer a panel that can't turn on because there's a fault with something, these panels are able to overcome faults. A non-working float does not disable the panel. That is the biggest thing. Now, I'd like to say the biggest thing is all these features built in. We've streamlined this down from 3,600 panels to 108 panels, made everybody's life easier. That's probably the better answer, but the reality is property damage is a real thing.
Yeah, I think the property damage is probably the be all end all. I'll end the poll there. We got a couple of great responses there. Thanks for showing us that you're paying attention. We can pass that off to the marketing team. We'll pause as well in case there are any additional questions that come in. I see we're coming up to the top of the hour here, so I'm going to spend 5 minutes showing those that may have a couple additional minutes for us how you can find the products that we're talking about today. But if you do need to jump off of your 1 o'clocks, I appreciate it. You spend the hour with us and certainly understand, that everyone's a little bit busy these days. So if you do need help on your next project, for those that need to leave, feel free to shoot us a note and we'll be happy to help you get this specified in your projects. For now, as we're wrapping up, I'll just quickly show, as I mentioned, ATSspec.com. If this is your first time joining us, this is what myself and my team does at ATS. We develop tools that make it easier for engineers and architects to specify the products that we discuss. We're free for the design community and paid for by the manufacturers. So Zoeller's a sponsor of our ATS system. The idea being they pay us so that the engineers have better access to the product. We develop a number of tools to help in sizing and selecting products. And we also have all these webinars that we've been doing. So if you go to right from our homepage, before you even log in, you go to Architects and Engineers, you'll see there's templates, you'll see there's a Learning Hub. The Learning Hub is where you can find our previously recorded webinars, including this one will be hosted here. You can see one of the previous ones that we did on Zoeller, the introduction to pivot panels. We've done sizing on pump sizing. You'll also see our template section, which is in essence, basically our internal masters. So you may have at your firm, maybe you do a lot of healthcare, you do a lot of schools, you do a lot of office buildings. You may have your internal standards for designing those types of applications. But this is the first time you've done a seniors residence in a while. You may be wondering, what product should I use in that application? Well, we have our own internal standards that we use. These are kind of our good, better, best for all these different applications, from everything from the plumbing fixtures to your pumps to your water heaters, and even starting to get into HVAC with First Code joining us recently. So you can just download the catalog version, or you can start a project and copy from that template, which is shown here once you're logged in, into a new project. On the left, you'll have your quick access where you've got your previously created projects, any of your own internal masters. So again, we have our ATS templates, which is the ATS recommended long-term care, ATS recommended hospital, but you may have your own firm XYZ version of a hospital where, all the hospitals that you use, you make sure that you have 8-inch gooseneck spouts. and you've gone through and customized that to make sure. You can customize our templates into your own master or start from scratch. You can also get started on your new project, which you can do right here just by hitting start now. That'll pop up the project info so you can put in and start organizing your project info. We do ask for location data so that we can apply a rule engine. The same way that we make sure the pivot panel matches the pump, we make sure that the basin meets barrier free in your state or province, and other things that are tied to state and province like flow rates. Quick specs is where you don't need that rule engine and you just have a single fixture you need to get started with. You can hit the plus button, put in, you can call it pump, and get started on a pump selection right away. So less info, but less rule engine built to it. Once you're in, you have all the categories that we have on our site. You can see I've got some of my favorite categories pinned at the top here. If you want to add a pin, you just hit the pin button. So the categories that you are using regularly are always going to be at the top, and you can kind of pin your favorites. I'm going to jump back over to this tab where I'm showing our masters like we talked about. So you can see we've done a number of these different webinars, and I have like a mechanical room webinar that we did a few months back. So this would be, the standard products that I use in a mechanical room. And then when I've started a project, all I have to do is go through, check a box, and I've got my mechanical room, all the different products that typically go into that. I can copy to and put it into a project. I can create a new project right from here, or if I've got a project, start it up. Pivot was the one I created today. So I can go pivot panel and I can put it into the existing product group or brand new product group. So I'll hit copy, and you may be asking, well, what is a product group? Well, once you're into the project file, you can see there's different tabs. So this is how you personally may organize the products within your project. So you may have a fixtures tab, a drainage tab, a water heater tab, a pump tab. You may have, different revisions. We often see we'll have the starting project, and then you'll copy those and make your changes. So that way you can see, Rev 120623. And then at the end of the month, when they come back and say, well, actually, we want to go back to the manual version that you had originally, well, you can just go back to the old version and keep that good to go. So you can see you've got that first tab that I started making. This is kind of a prep project because I always assume I'm going to be short on time. I know I tend to interject with a lot of questions and throw off the presenters. So after you've added your products, all you have to do is hit this check boxes, and you go to download, and you can download that in all these different formats. So I could download a submittal, the fixture schedule in Excel, a written spec. We have 3 different types of written specs here. The manufacturer spec sheets, which is going to have those TDS sheets that Jeff mentioned, is all going to be included, and hit generate documents, and this is going to pull up a package just like this, where you can see I've downloaded all these different files in a nice zip folder. These would then be located here, so you can get a nice written spec where everything's open and editable, so we can just hit copy, paste, and you could copy that directly into your internal written spec. Make any changes you want along the way, add alternates. Maybe you want to say it's hard spec, or if you want to just get a generic spec and start, maybe your master doesn't have a control panel spec currently, and you want to make sure that you put the pivot panel into your master spec, you could do so. Also, Excel schedules. What's nice about our schedules in Excel is that, again, if you have water heaters, drainage, pumps, accessories, fixtures, those all have different, column headers, and our system will actually download them as separate tabs within this file. So you'll have a water heater schedule with the most common attributes shown based on our research in the market. Fixture schedules, accessories, all have different categories. It's customized to the type of product that you're using. And you can see all the important details included here. And then we can go over to those PDF options that I mentioned. This is our submittal, where we combine multiple products onto one page. Gives you some of the important details. But if you need the extra detail, especially when it comes to pumps, you may want the manufacturer spec sheet so you can see all the curves, all the other options. So this will break all that down with the manufacturer spec sheet. You can see our Pivot Pro sheet, that the TDS sheet that Jeff showed earlier. Nice title page, nice agenda, yada yada. If you want to make changes or add more products, I'm going to jump back to the project here. I'm going to hit the plus button and we'll just go directly into the panel. You can see those pins that I talked about earlier are saving. So my favorite ones are at the top. Jeff was showing a couple of the models. I'm going to search. It was the 124D4 was the one that you were showing. So I can search within the category, get that Pivot Pro model. I can add my alarm panel option if I want. You can see all the additional features. And then one thing we've done with the new system, we've integrated the spec sheets directly into the system. So if you want to have a deeper review, is this the exact right panel? Is this the exact right pump? You can get the spec sheet right here and review any of the details to make sure it's exactly what you're looking for. Once you've configured it, you hit add product. Very straightforward. If we were doing the pump first, our rule engine would then show you the appropriate panel, but we just went straight to panel here. So it's just going to be a single selection. But I can show you the pump real quick as well. So if we went into the pump category, say we're looking at the 295, that's right here at the top. I can configure this. I can go duplex. I need a duplex panel. Let's say we're just doing standard 2-inch outlet, standard cord length. We'll do the double seal so we get that thermal protection and a bronze impeller. Now I've configured everything. This goes into the orange. I can add it to my product. It's then going to apply the rule engine to make sure we get the correct panel to this. And that's the easy way of how you select your pump and panels. Of course, you may need help sizing the pump in the first place. Zoeller has a great sizing tool. We're looking to integrate the sizing tools onto our system. And of course, you can reach out to me directly, zach@atsspec.com, and I'll be happy to discuss your design details, like your flow and TDH, your electrical, what you're trying to pump, and we can help you size and select the appropriate pump. So if you don't know exactly what pump you're looking for, don't worry, just feel free to reach out. You can do that directly on the system by hitting our chat button here. You can do that also by requesting a build over here on the left. You can request a build. That'll take you directly in line to our spec team where you can put in your project details, all the information that we talked about before. You can say pump flow rate of 25 GPM, say 15 TDH, 208 volt 3-phase, duplex, et cetera, et cetera. Our team will size it up, send it back to you in the documents that you're looking for. So that's the very quick version of the ATS introduction. If you would like any additional details on ATS, please feel free to reach out to me directly. If you would like to set up a version of this session directly for your firm, if you want more details, you can reach out to your market development team, whether it's Mo, Mel, Natalia, myself, Bill, whoever it is that you've been working with. If you don't know who your MD team person should be, please feel free to reach out to myself and we'll get you set up. Otherwise, I just want to say thank you for sticking around. I know we ran over time. I do appreciate you spending the time with us today. We have another session, our last session of the year, coming up next week. I believe it's actually going to be on Thursday. It's the first time all year that we're going on a Thursday. Everyone else has been on a Wednesday. But that's going to be a great discussion with another one of our partners. So thank you, Jeff, for a very informative discussion. It was fantastic. I know the Pivot Pro is a great product. We just need to get a lot more information out there on it. And if any of the people on the call need help getting your master updated to include Zoeller or the Pivot Pro, feel free to reach out. We'll be happy to get you set up. If I don't see you again, have a great rest of the year, and we'll talk to you in the new year. Bye for now, y'all.